it resists the urge to convert someone to, and we use that language pretty intentionally, convert someone to my way of thinking.
Ooh.
So that's the first kind of step.
Hi, folks. My name is Dr. Kristen Donnelly, and I am one of the good doctors of Abbey Research. At Abbey Research, we believe that curiosity can change the world, because if we're all really honest, it's actually the only thing that ever has. People saying, I wonder if I go over here, or if I talk to this person, or if I touch this thing, what does it do? It's how we've moved human progress forward. And the process of getting curious, asking questions, getting to know the world around us, and getting to know ourselves and others is something that we call empathy, which you may have heard of, and we think it's a little bit broader than emotions. We want to have conversations with people that help us understand them so we can understand ourselves better. And this series is in service of that. It's called Welcome to My World, and I have the utter privilege of chatting to folks from all over the place who are different than me, which is, of course, every person, about something in their lives that if we knew more about it, our human experience would be richer. And today's guest is one I've been trying to get on the show for really since before the show existed. And she is a massive friend of Abbey Research. You've seen her on our channel before. Our dear, dear friend, Sharyl, who has been fostering spaces of belonging for more than 2 decades. She has extensive experience in educational and nonprofit sectors, and where she focuses on inclusivity and cultural humility. Sharyl and I, in full disclosure, met going to seminary together. And so she's one of my favorite interfaith conversation partners. And so a lot of those nonprofit spaces have been faith-based, Christian, Protestant, faith-based. She's also the co-founder of Kardia House Consulting, which exists to offer models of communication to resist polarization. Y'all, everyone should be hiring these folks, and move towards organizational health and relational wholeness. Oof. Not a small task. She lives in Central Texas with her husband, their 2 adorable children, and their menagerie of animals. And I am so honored, Sharyl, that you were able to finally carve time and join me today. Thanks so much.
I'm happy to be here. And yeah, you did a little bit of arm twisting, but I've just enjoyed watching all of the other guests, and I've enjoyed watching you develop this show over several seasons, it feels like. I don't know that you have seasons really, but many episodes, and you have
episodes, yeah,
all the time. So yeah, it was my turn. I took it. So
in typical you fashion, I was like, I need help with this. And I thought that meant you would come on. And instead you sent me 25 other people to talk to, which is your Enneagram 6 coming out, I think, a little bit strongly. So but let's dive right in. I would love to know, let's start with Kardia House. Tell me a little bit more about it, because I think that can lead us into a really good conversation about communication itself.
So Kardia House is a concept that I came up with my business partner, Dr. Josh Ritter. He and I have worked together for almost 8 years now, and we're just really good friends. I like to tell the story that we were matched by a matchmaker named Maggie Griffin, if you want to call it that in the business world, business matchmaking maybe. She is our graphic designer. If you go on our website and see our gorgeous logo, that is all Maggie Griffin. Look her up. She's amazing. And we were going to do a project together that was suggested by actually our bosses in our other life. And neither one of us really wanted to trust the other person. We had our own baggage. We actually both have MDivs and thought certain things about people with MDivs. It's a thing. We do this. We judge people.
We do. We make assumptions about people based on lots of qualifications.
We do, which is funny because that is actually what we now teach is non-judgmental presence, but we weren't doing that at the time. And so we really had a lot of judgments about the other and assuming particular positions and all these things. And so after a conversation, we realized that we were very different, but we also had some really important shared values that made it possible for us to work together. The more we worked together, the more we realized we actually did think alike on a lot of things that were critical to be able to work together. And those differences actually complemented each other in a way that made us really good together when it came to facilitating conversations, when it came to brainstorming. And so we just started one project and that led to another project. And all of a sudden we had a whole lot of projects. And so after a while, we ended up deciding, we should really make this official. And so we started Kardia House. And we both have common backgrounds. He has a PhD in rhetoric. I did my undergrad in communication theory, and then I specialized in, preaching in particular, but also I've just done speaking for my entire life and care a lot about communication. So as we started really thinking about what is it that we see that keeps people apart, there's many things, but one thing that just kept becoming clear to us in organizations that we've been a part of and that we were being asked to come and do some consulting in, it was that there was breakdowns in communication. And that just seemed like a human issue that people weren't talking about a lot. They were talking around it, but not necessarily talking about it. And really in the last 4 years or so, the polarization has been a pretty hot topic, and people wanted help with their divisive issues, but they just didn't know how to talk about it, and they were scared to talk about it. And so we were often being called in on very contentious issues. And it was more that what we brought were tools and resources to frame the conversation itself versus the issue at hand. Yeah. And so that became really important, was what is the best model of communication or dialogue for this particular issue? And so we've really honed our skills over the last 7 or 8 years in models of communication for different scenarios.
Well, as I do podcast interviews, I think one of the comments I get the most frequently is, well, none of us know how to talk to each other anymore, and that's our real problem. And I'll say, yes, but it goes deeper than that, in that it's not that we don't know how, it's that sometimes we could know how, but we're not brave enough to try. And so there's a lot in that. So I'm really curious, like, I hear you use a lot of phrases like non-judgmental presence and things like that. So what model, and you've talked about using models, so what model does Kardia House really kind of hang its hat on at this point?
We've developed a model called generous communication that has kind of taken root as we've worked with many models, and we will rely on other models as they kind of become apparent that that's the right one. But
right.
I guess our brand is based on generous communication because it has a real way of getting at the heart of the issue. So just to kind of back up a little bit, why we've developed this model is because what we see at the heart of the issue of communication is that everyone wants to be seen and heard and understood. And when we're not, it tends to make us feel separate and separated. And we're trying not to feel separate and separated, even though that's often subconscious. And in that process, we often talk louder, we talk more, or we withdraw, all things that people then respond to. And in our differences that we all have and in differences that we encounter, we often feel more separated and more isolated. And because of that uncomfortable feeling that we get when we're in that situation, we tend to take either a defensive or offensive posture. And at that time, the thing that we tend to do is to decide, okay, if I can make my difference normalized and your difference othered, then I can feel okay in this moment. And so we're in that, point in time, and these are split-second decisions, right? But in that point in time when we're doing this, what's happening is that we forget that the other person is making the same bids for connection, and they're doing the exact same thing. So that's when we start just talking past each other, and nobody's really getting what they want, which is to be seen and heard and understood.
Yeah.
And so that is why we wanted to say, we've got to back up a little bit before we just teach, communication skills. I mean, we can get that anywhere. You can just Google communication skills, take a class. But we need to know why it is that we can't communicate. What is at the heart of that issue? And so that's what generous comm tries to do, is to look at what's the need that's not being met, which comes a little bit from nonviolent communication, but it goes a little bit further. And then understanding that these miscommunications then happen that are harmful and hurtful, that create this further divide. So what can we do to then help with that division that's happening? So that's kind of the start of that.
So many questions, so many things. I mean, that's a little bit of how we do our model, is that when, and so a lot of this resonates with me. So folks will call and say, like, we really need DEI stuff. And I'll be like, okay, thinking in my head, like, you probably do, but what you really need is an understanding of humanity first. Mm-hmm. And what we really got to do is back this up and talk about empathy and understanding, and what true diversity and inclusivity really means, and how do we do that. And that's like, so I joke with clients all the time, if you want me to come in and talk about racism, that's point G in this conversation. What I would love to do is start at point A, and let's just clear all these words we all use all the time. Let's come up with some agreed upon definitions, and let's move forward. And that sounds a little bit of what generous comm is. It's like, okay, well, we're coming in here and we acknowledge there's a problem. And like, we could throw Band-Aids on bullet holes and just tell you how to talk to each other better. But all that's going to do is let this one fight end. It's not going to help you increase the humanity of the person in front of you, which is really what you guys are advocating for, is to hold the humanity of the other person just as deeply as you hold the humanity for yourself.
Yeah, so that's really where we started, as well as doing DEI work, and people ask us to come and do DEI work, and really wrestling with, is this really helpful? If this one-off, and we were first known for doing interfaith literacy, which we still do a lot of, and I think is important, but so much of that was teaching listening skills. And so again, that is so much of communication people forget, is the listening piece. And so it just made sense for us to go back to the communication piece. So kind of how we developed it, if you don't mind me kind of getting into that a little bit, was that we studied some philosophers, some theologians, some religious leaders, and looked at how they moved their private practice into the public square, because that is where we struggle so much, is how do we take the things we believe and we want to be about and then engage them in the world when we come into conflict. And so we looked at how, even religious systems and traditions and worldviews, what is kind of the best of us saying about conflict, and how does this work? Because we don't believe that the private can stay private, that you have to bring your whole self. It's you because you do bring your whole self.
Yeah.
Even though you may think that you can check part of yourself. And so I think that's one of the ways that we get into conflict. Is that
I think it's like one of the biggest myths that, when I go into businesses that we talk about, is this idea that there's some sort of barrier. And right. The myth that lets us labor in that is that the labor system was built for somebody who had a partner at home. And so you could offload significantly more, but that doesn't mean that it was healthy. And it doesn't mean that it didn't lead to really shallow masculinity or really, really toxic marriages or a lot of things like that. So the assumption that just because this is how things always worked, that it was the right way, has also gotten in a ton of trouble. And I know you guys see that in generous comm.
Yeah, we never say that we create safe spaces, because we don't believe that we can do that. We can't guarantee safe spaces. We talk about brave spaces. You can choose to be brave. You can choose vulnerability. We ask that other people hold space with respect, but I mean, we don't talk about safe spaces in that way either. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Also especially because you guys work in a lot of higher ed spaces and people with a lot of movement in higher ed. And that phrase has become like kryptonite in a lot of higher ed spaces. Like, it got so mocked so quickly. And for some, not that it should have been mocked, but it should have been pushed back on a little bit. And I think in the pushback, it became obliterated and we lost some of what that could mean. Yeah, we talk about that inclusivity is where you've created a space where everyone gets to show up on their own terms.
Yes.
And that's our definition in a way of safe space, is that everybody gets to show up however they want to show up. You're not determining it for them because of some opinion you have, violence you've set, policy you've set, physical space you've built. Everybody gets to show up on their own terms. And that is so much work. I'm sure you deal with that with your clients, is helping them understand that, like, yeah, you have these tools, but it's work to make it happen. This is a practice. This isn't a one-off training.
Right. So if you're going to make it a mandatory training, you're already setting a power dynamic. So you have to consider what that means.
Yeah.
And participation being mandatory. How are you going to do that? You can't make anyone talk. You can't, I mean, you could try, but then know that you're not going to get real answers. You're not going to get anywhere. And so trying to make sure that people understand what they're really asking for when they say those things and the best way to set that up. And so what we really like to do is, you know, at the best scenario is to look at, you know, for a business, we say, if you can bring us in before you make the announcement, before you do the thing, so that we can talk about the framing of the announcement, the framing of, you know, the plan, so that, you know, clear communication is compassionate communication, as Brene Brown says, because if people are already stirred and anxious because you've given them cryptic emails about something that's coming, or there's already a tiff because of how things are rolling out, and then you bring in the outside facilitators, I mean, anxiety is so high, you're not probably going to have the best session. Yeah. So what can you do a year before you want to do the thing, 6 months before you want to do the thing? And obviously sometimes things happen and there's a conflict and you need help, but the more forward thinking you can be, the better off you are.
Gosh, and it's one of the points I got to make in my most recent TEDx talk, is that businesses are obsessed with innovation and planning. And we do that for our products all the time, and we never do it for our people. Like, I've got product launch data out 10 years from some companies, but they can't tell me what kind of job descriptions they want to do 3 months from now. And so much of it is because in the American work culture, especially, and I definitely experienced this in Britain and the UK as well, so I shouldn't put it just on America, but it is both of our mutual experience, is we just view people as interchangeable cogs. So we don't have to think about them. They're not our competitive advantage. They're not our ROI. They're not our KPI. They're not any of those things. And we only care about people as we can plug them into those systems. And what you guys are saying is that that's not how this works. And you can't actually, everybody wants to be seen and heard and understood. And we have to create environments in which that can flourish.
And when people are anxious and they're talking about what's coming or might be coming, they're not productive.
Of course not.
They're not giving you their best. And they're also job searching. So it's really not good for you or your business to withhold that kind of information and to be, you know, constantly trying to keep that upper hand that makes you maybe feel like you have some sense of control, because you really don't ever have that type of control that you think you do.
Oh gosh. We could do an entire discussion on perceived control versus actual control.
Yeah.
And the number of mistakes I see some of my peers make where I'm like, just talk to your people, like just stand up. And I saw what I find so interesting now is the companies who are enjoying the Great Resignation. If I have this hunch that if I talk to them and I said, well, how did you communicate lockdown protocols? That if they were the company that was like, you got up there and you said, we don't know what's going on, but we're doing our best to keep you safe, and no one left, or like a small percentage of disgruntled people left. If your immediate response was, well, we need you back in the office as soon as possible, and I don't care about your anxiety level or the realities of your family or anything else, the economy says we have to do this, without any apology or transparency or humanity, people fled. I haven't seen data on that yet, but I feel like that feels like that would track. Is that if you got up and you said, I don't know what I'm doing either. This is, I don't know if you heard a rumor, unprecedented, but we're going to try to figure this one out together. People hung around. I know that was our experience. People really really seemed to appreciate when my brother and I would stand up and be like, so here's what we know today. We'll talk to you tomorrow about what we know tomorrow. And in the meantime, come to us if you're scared.
Yep. It's not oversharing or undersharing. And it is the burden of leadership for sure. And we do have
a hard thing to walk
for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no, it's not easy, but there is certainly something about the posture of it.
Yeah.
So a little bit about, if you don't mind, the model itself,
No.
what generous communication is. No, not allowed. We're done. Sorry.
We're done.
Time's up.
Breaking up. Yep. Go. No,
Yep.
of course. Tell
Done.
me.
So there is an actual model, and some of the pieces is it resists the urge to convert someone to, and we use that language pretty intentionally, convert someone to my way of thinking.
Ooh.
So that's the first kind of step.
Okay.
So when you talk about a manager who stands up and says, my way or the highway, that is not generous.
No.
So if you think of the language of generosity, we call generosity a miracle. And I know this is a lot of religious terminology, but it really is, when you think about in our day and age and just humanity in general, it is a miracle to be generous with anything. It is very difficult.
Yeah, because we've all been raised in scarcity mindset that if we don't protect what's ours, it'll go away.
Absolutely. So it is a practice. We consider this like a process learning type thing.
Yeah.
And so the first kind of practice is resisting the urge to convert someone to my way of thinking in a conversation. And that takes practice. And you will catch yourself when you start kind of, if you want to use mindfulness language, start keeping that in the forefront of your mind, you will catch yourself doing it a lot.
Yeah.
The second thing is we see communication as communion, as entering into like a oneness with someone else, that I am trying to understand someone. I'll read you a quote from our curriculum, but we enter this act of communion as communication. As we enter this act of communication, we can be generous with our listening, generous in our interpretation of our neighbors, and generous in the gentleness of our words. Learning to view communication within this more generous framework is what allows us to begin to reframe conversations with more care and compassion.
Okay, I'm going to be chewing on that for a little while. Yeah, okay.
So it's more of like a choice of relationship.
Okay.
And seeing that the person is not the object of our words.
Yeah, they're not the vessel for our ideas.
The vessel for our ideas, the place to land our opinions and feelings.
Or our combatant, or like a combatant partner, which I think so much, especially if corporate communication is taught to treat people as your combatant.
Yes. So I don't get into this as much in the framework, but in our curriculum, we talk about the adversarial model of communication, which is part of public deliberation.
Yeah.
And the adversarial model is very much how we've been taught. That's win or lose. And that's what you do, in corporate communication, that you've had the opportunity to win or lose an argument. And so we have very much been taught that that is the purpose. And then we understand that words are neutral, but they're given power, positive or negative, only by us, and that the ways that we use those words.
Yeah, and that's like, I came into that a couple of weeks ago on a podcast where someone was asking me about something, and I said, well, the problem is, like, as you're asking me this question, it's almost in bad faith and you don't even know it, because you're assigning moral value and judgment to those words, and I'm simply saying this is what is.
Right.
And so what we have to do is unpack our moral value we have attached to language. And then there's also some language we have to change, which, you and I have spoken about, and you're going to be helping us on our training that is coming up in June about words we don't say anymore, and how do we kind of work around that. But we have no concept of how many moral judgments we have attached to language subconsciously.
I would say words can be given negative. I mean, that's what connotation versus denotation, right? It can be given that connotation so many times that we can't undo the negative.
Yeah.
And we don't say that word anymore, right?
Yeah. And so, and we can't undo the negative, or it's so weird that having the conversation with somebody who, like, so for me, the word is fat. So I don't see fat as a moral word.
Right.
So I'm okay calling myself fat. But the number of people that try to convince me, oh, but you're not fat, and I'm like, right, but you're assigning that fat is bad. and they just like but it is, and like their minds are blown and they don't know what to do. And it's fascinating, the elasticity that is language that we pretend is in fact static.
Once you get to relationships or conversations with non-native speakers in a language, then you really start to realize how neutral words are.
Yeah, as you and I are talking, it's the end of March, and I saw Cole Porter's Anything Goes last night, which is not a musical that has aged well. Cole Porter is 100% writing in the 1930s, and it's the 1930s, but a huge part of it is that there's an English speaker. It's an Englishman, an Earl, who is trying to learn American idioms. And that's one of the running gags throughout the entire musical. And one of the ones he can't understand is step on it as fast. He keeps saying step in it.
Oh.
And like just that one little letter changes the entire phrase. So yeah, there's idioms, there's actual non-native speakers. I've talked a lot about Northern Irish idioms. You have a lot of connections with non-native English speakers, and also non-Texan English speakers in your life. And so, my gosh. Okay, so our next conversation is going to be entirely about language, because I'm watching our time and I'm realizing, believe it or not, we're at the end. So I would love to give you an opportunity now to kind of, in Clubhouse speak, land the plane. But what would you like to leave our listeners with at this point?
That's a big plane that I took off there. So let me see how I want to land it. I would say that being generous is not simple, but it is profound and it is worth it. And it's something that we've been practicing personally for a long time before we decided to try and make a model out of it, that it wasn't done just for the sake of launching a business, and that it has radically changed both of our lives in both scary and wonderful ways. And that it has been something that I have noticed has changed both my personal relationships and just my interactions. And it's brought me a lot more peace in that I don't take things as personally, because I am able to see more humanity and to consider where people are coming from. And that has made a huge difference for me. And so it's something that we're doing now in workshops, whether it be half day or whole day in retreats, but we're also really excited to be launching it on an online platform where people can practice with strangers online. What better way to see what you can do that, be generous with people online in a platform. And we are issuing a generous comm certificate now. And so that is something that it felt a little weird at first, just because it is this practice, but we know that people want to be able to go through something and say, I've learned it. And honestly, it is a lot of commitment. And we want to say, you know what, you have gone through and you have done this, and we certify you and we give you the charge to go out and continue to practice. And so we will be doing that and giving this generous comm certificate. And we're really excited to do that.
And we will be two of the first people to sign up for sure. That's really exciting. So, Sharyl, where is the best place on the internet to find you if folks have questions?
Our website is just kardiahouse.com. I'm sure that will be in the show notes, but it's Kardia. And then our Instagram, and those are probably my two favorite places, but we're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Any of those places will work just fine. And I know that you can put all that in the show notes. So
indeed we will. The industrious Eleanor will make sure that everything is settled.
And we can even put our online community there, so you can join our online community if you would like to do that.
Amazing. I'll make sure the links are there. Well,
appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this and starting this conversation, because now that you've done one of these, you will do more, because we need to have longer conversations.
It was fun. Thanks for making this happen.
My absolute pleasure. Pals, if you enjoyed our conversation, we would really appreciate a thumbs up, because then the YouTube algorithm will spread it to more people and we can invite more people into this paradigm of generous communication. If you like these styles of interviews that I do and the kind of content that we have, please subscribe to the channel. Erin and I do so much around here that we hope will help you understand other humans better. Getting in touch with Sharyl is not difficult. All the links to do so will be below. Kardia House is worth a follow on all the platforms, because what they drop for free is really, really thought-provoking stuff. Please make sure especially to check out their blog, which is often something I need to read 2 or 3 times before I fully wrap my brain around it, looking at you, Josh. But it's always spurring conversations and senses of belonging. My name is Dr. Kristen Donnelly. You have been watching Welcome to My World. My guest today is Sharyl West Loeung, who is one of my personal pantheon heroes and dear, dear friend, in full disclosure, and a good friend of both the good doctors. And if you would love to talk generous communication, I know Sharyl would love to talk to you. In the meantime, whether I see you here on the YouTube channel in one of our series about Bridgerton, or Colonizers World Tour, or another edition of Welcome to My World, or you catch us on our newsletter or anywhere else. Also, the training that I mentioned, the link to take that, which is called Words We Don't Say Anymore, and it happened or is happening on June 1st, 2022. The link to join us for that training as well will be in the show notes. It's been an honor for you to spend your time with us. We know it is never a small choice to spend time with strangers on the internet, and we are grateful. We'll see you next time. Bye.